Links to previous episodes are given in the video description, so don't forget to like, subscribe and share the video. Shadows of the Lost. Episode 11. Chapter 72. Elijah. The silence that followed once the rest had left was deafening. The unease I could sense from Rayhana and Raven was growing, and even the kids were quieter. Azura was still in a strop from her little run-in with Leo, frowning as she sat there with her arms folded. She may be a feisty little one, but her stubbornness and the ability to hold grudges topped even Scarlet's. She was staring at the floor, her chest heaving and her nostrils still flared. Dante was lying down with his eyes shut, but I knew he was awake. His fists were clenched, and he had a frown on his face. The quintuplets, Aaron, Sienna, and Tatum, were playing with Rayhana, who was keeping them occupied with magical bubbles. Bubbles that were floating around endlessly. "How long until they get there?" Raven asked me quietly. "A few hours more, it's only been about 1 hour." I replied, glancing out at the sky. It was late afternoon now. I didn't blame them, knowing that Scarlet was out there. I felt frustrated and helpless. But it made sense that I was here. When it came to strength, I was ultimately stronger, and if anything happened here, we needed a strong defense. We had several barriers placed around the pack the moment they'd left, barriers that Magdalene, Rayhana, and one other witch had worked on. Barriers so strong that no one could come in or go out. Janina had also placed a few more spells, so we would know if anyone approached the pack area. The magic was so strong that I could feel it in the air, weighing down on us, and it made me physically sick. Catalia was by the window clutching her teddy bear, which she had named after the Escara pup. Skyla was watching some Disney villain kids movie, but she was more distracted than focused, stroking the cat she had abducted from somewhere. I was certain it belonged to one of the Delta's kids, but she was adamant it was now hers. "How about pizza?" I suggested, trying to lighten the mood. "Barrier," Rayhana reminded me. "I know, but we can make it together. What do you girls think?" I suggested to the twins and Azura. Azura frowned deeply. "I don't want to. When will Mama be back?" "I'm not sure, but how about we make pizza and we save her a few slices?" I suggested, standing up. "I don't want to do anything, my life is so hard," Skyla said, dropping onto her stomach. "Well, there went that plan. You go to Dulsanra, I'll mind the kitties," Raven said to Rayhana. She nodded, standing up as Tatum began crying. "Come here, Tatum," Raven cooed, picking him up. "Thanks, babe." Rayhana smiled at her before she left the room. Aaron hurried after her, and she picked him up. "I'll take him with me." I looked around, trying to hide the unease inside of me. I couldn't help but wonder which of those men and women I saw earlier would not return. Just like all these kids, many of those who went had families of their own. "All right, come on, enough of this gloominess. Let's do something fun," I said, standing up. Skyla groaned, squeezing the cat and stroking its head, before pausing and smiling suddenly. "I want to sew," she said. Although I knew she was up to something, I nodded. Was it because she probably knew I'd struggle with this? "Sure," I said, running my fingers through my hair. I want to make a rag doll. Azura piped in suddenly, her head jerking up towards me. Good luck, Granddad. Dante added, his eyes still half closed. I'm sure Claire or Clara will have everything you'll need. Oh, I can help too. Let's get sewing. Raven added excitedly. I want to make Kaika's shirt too. Will you help me, Auntie? Catalia asked Raven, her eyes hopeful. I wasn't sure if this was a good idea, but at least all three were all for it. It'll keep their minds off of everything, at least, and that was how we all ended up sitting down and beginning on the 3 individual projects. Be safe, Red. No, no. This is for my cat. Skyla scolded Azura, who had just said her dress looked weird. It's so cute. Raven agreed. My fingertips were throbbing from all the times I had pricked them with needles. I had given up and decided to simply watch. Catalia had brought the torn fabric she always carried and had asked Raven to help stitch it onto a tartan fabric for her Teddy's shirt. The effect that kidnapping had on her would stay with her. I knew that much. I also hoped that Kid was okay too, wherever he was. Claire and Clara had taken the quintuplets to the playroom, and Sienna had fallen asleep. Skyla was making some odd outfit for the cat, Catalia was finishing off with her torn fabric. Of all three, she was the best at this. As for my girl, I had no idea what she was making. It looked like a knitted doll. Raven helped her, although she had been the one to choose how she wanted it. The black stitches were making it look a little creepy. What's that meant to be? I asked her. She paused and looked up at me with her large blue eyes. A voodoo doll. She said seriously, making Raven pause and look at her. 3 of who? She asked curiously. Dante's ugly cousin. She stated. Oh, which quintuplet are you talking about? I was assuming you're the only ugly one in my life. Dante replied haughtily. Hey, the Westwoods are not ugly. And I am not ugly, unlike you and your ugly cousin. Us Rossies tend to be very handsome, actually. Dante replied. She means Leo. Skyla cackled. Wait. Do you need like a hair of his or something? 1. No, not at all, it'll work anyway. Azura replied. Shoving wool into the body, the half-detached head lolling. I wasn't sure it was going to stay attached at the brute rough way she was handling it. Besides, I found his cigarette that he dropped earlier. You only need something that belongs to them, so this will work. I frowned as she took out the unused cigarette and pushed it into the body. Were we raising normal kids? I don't know. I looked between Skyla and Azura, both of whom looked very excited about this voodoo doll. Raven laughed as she took the doll from Azura and began stitching the neck up. I'll add the eyes. Azura said, rummaging in the button box and picking out 2 light blue buttons. Ah! He has this color eyes. The evil man will be punished. Dante chuckled. You're so weird, Azura. You're weirder, Dante. She shot back. Don't make me make a Dante doll. Doll or not? Aren't we puppets anyway? Simply being used to play out a bigger game, I frowned. That was a pretty deep way to think for a kid, but this was Dante. He simply sighed and turned on his side, watching us. See, you talk so weird. Azura replied, brushing his comment off. Want to talk about it? I asked him quietly. No, I hope everything goes okay, he frowned, his eyes full of worry, so I gave him a don't worry, they'll handle it. I reassured him. They'll be fine. Let's just pray Leo gets hurt. Azura added. That's not something you should say about an ally, Azura. I reprimanded her lightly. She gave me a glare as Raven passed a toy to Sienna. I don't like him, so I'm going to poke some pins into his body and soak him in spices and vinegar. That will teach him for messing with me. I was glad she didn't know real black magic because I was certain the rows of voodoo dolls would be endless. With Liam being her main victim. He somehow always says the wrong thing at the wrong time. Thank you, Auntie. I really like it. Catalia said happily, looking down at her teddy, which now wore a tartan green and black shirt. The torn fabric was now a neat square on the front, and Raven had stitched kike in green on the front patch. I'm glad you at least know how to sew, I said to Raven. That teddy looks great now, I added to Catalia. Thank you, Granddaddy, she said gently. She smiled at me, and I smiled back, standing up. I think I'll go for a quick round of the mansion. Despite the heavy security, I still needed to be on alert. I was the only one allowed to go see Kiara. The key code had been changed just in case she somehow had someone release her. We needed to be extremely careful. After doing a quick round, I'll go take a look at her too. I needed to make sure everything was in order around here. Anything could happen, and we needed to stay on guard. Scarlet, the spells are all in place, Liam said through the earpiece. No one can go in or out. Got it, I said, looking over at Rayhan, who was frowning deeply. Liam was leading one of the three teams. They had broken through the Crimson King's defenses. The three teams had attacked from all sides, closing in on the enemy's location. We had made sure he was here first, and he had been. We had succeeded in coming without being detected, thanks to the witches. The other two teams, who had taken the first attack, were headed by Marcel and Alejandro. L20 and Maria were on Marcel's team. As for Rayhan and I, we had a smaller team and were heading a backup squad that was going to join the fight upon the signal. Our job was a little different, but it was vital. Are you okay? I asked Rayhan. He seemed tense and restless. He gave a curt nod. The sound of menacing howls filled the air and through the car piece as both sides clashed. Each of the main three teams had 5 witches on them. Mine had 2 and I prayed it gave us the advantage we needed. Ready, Scarlet? Rayhan? Alejandro's low voice came. I took a deep breath. This was it. We needed to kill the host before we could kill the Jinn, and that's where I came in. We needed to rip the heart of the host out, resulting in weakening the Jinn. For the Jinn to take a new host, he needed time, and when he was in his true form, right after I killed the Crimson King, that was when Maria would do her part. Alejandro and I were the ones who would attack the Crimson King. Whoever succeeded in killing him was fine as long as it got done. I just hoped it was me, as I healed faster, and we all knew whoever got close would suffer greatly. Rayhan and our squad would watch my back as I went for the Crimson King, making sure I wasn't attacked. "Ready?" Rayhan said, his canines coming out, his eyes blazing green. "Maria." I glanced at Rayhan, wishing he knew the truth. He deserved to know the truth. He looked at me, and for a second, I thought I saw a flicker of sadness in his eyes. "Ready?" I replied determinedly. My eyes flashed, and I shifted as one with the rest of my team. We broke through the trees. The huge stone wall that came ever closer suddenly exploded, sending stone and debris flying in all directions, paving the way for us to join the battle. I jumped over the rubble and through the flames, landing lightly. Havoc surrounded us in every direction. The smell of blood and ash hung in the air. Wolves of all colors fought against the army of similar-colored wolves. All in shades of auburn and reddish-brown. Each one had orangey red eyes, and I realized that they were all puppets of the man that stood in the center. He had his arms raised, a look of pure fury on his melting, burned face. It was obvious the host was dying. I had a feeling it wouldn't last long. The Eskara boy must not be near. Magdalene's warning rang in my head. The Jin's deal with the Eskara line meant he could take the Eskara's bodies without delay, unlike if it was anyone else. I was glad the boy was all the way in Puerto Rico, not only for his safety but for all our sakes. We just needed to make sure he didn't have the time to change to a new host. It was obvious he hadn't been expecting us, his eyes blazing with rage, his aura surging as he commanded his army, flames surrounding him as he slayed our men and women without mercy. So, this was the Crimson King, this was the man who hurt my family. Two of the fire wolves lunged at me, but Rayhan knocked them aside, killing one in seconds. The second followed seconds later, its blood splattering over my grey fur. I scanned the crowds and saw that Alejandro had now shifted. His Lycan form towered above all the wolves as he let out vicious growl, engaging in battle with the Crimson King. The Jin's power was immense, and he was thrown back. His aura wrapped around him protectively as he lunged at the Crimson King once more. He swiped his claws down his chest, injuring him before he was thrown across the ground. His head snapped to me, and I gave the smallest nod. "Be careful," he growled through the link. I knew what I was doing. This was it. My moment. Tensing, I broke into a run, launching myself off the ground, claws raised. It was then that the Crimson King's head snapped upwards and I found myself staring into a pair of burning orange eyes. Eyes filled with such power and hatred that I felt it deep within me. "You're mine," he hissed in a voice that was far from human. He raised his hand, and a huge surge of fire roared around us. I bit my lip, feeling it burn away at me. I couldn't breathe. I heard Alejandro growl as he joined, distracting him for a moment. I don't think this Jin realized that although I may not be as powerful as my daughter, I had experience and wit on my side. Alejandro engaging him had given me the moment I needed, and I shifted, the momentary change easing the agony in my body as one slammed him to the ground with all my strength, my aura scurrying around me. My red hair fell in front of my face, my heart beating rapidly. I raised my hand, ready to tear his heart out. "Wrong. You're mine," I whispered venomously. It was almost as if we were moving in sync, as our claws came out, and we plunged our hands into each other's chests. Alejandro, it was as if time had slowed, flames surrounding Scarlet and the fur. I could see her skin melting away to reveal a raw layer beneath it. I watched as she plunged her hand into his chest fearlessly, but my stomach twisted the moment I saw his clawed hand ripping into her chest too. He gripped her other arm, crushing the wrist of her hand that was trying to bury itself into his chest. He was clearly unharmed by her attempt. His eyes blazed and I saw the determination in them, knowing he was ready to kill. No. Not under my watch. I was by her side in a flash, grabbing hold of his hand before he managed to rip her heart from her chest. It burned to touch him. He was powerful, his eyes were blazing with unspeakable power and his aura swirling around us like a tornado. So, this was the man behind everything. Well. The Lycan king himself still came to battle even when he's so weak, he hissed venomously. I'm still stronger than you. But I couldn't say anything in my Lycan form. Scarlet's face was pale as she gripped his wrist, trying to stop him from wrenching her heart. I held on tight, making sure he didn't penetrate her any further. His fingers were almost completely in her chest now, slowly pushing forward. She coughed up blood as I used all my strength. I aimed a kick at him, only for him to block it. It was then that a strong wave of powerful blue fire created a huge force field between us, instantly easing the heat. I took the chance and sliced his hand right off with my dagger. That's for the pup. He roared in anger, scooping Scarlet up with the hand still buried in her chest. I jumped away as a huge force shattered Liam's barrier and threw us back. I shielded Scarlet's body as we both hit the ground brutally. My head slammed against the rocky ground, sending spasms of searing pain through me, and I hissed. I wasn't up to my normal standards. I was forced to shift back, feeling blood in my mouth as I rolled over, placing Scarlet on the ground slowly. She coughed up blood. I looked down at her chest to see she was already healing, but that hand was still stuck in her chest. Don't look! She growled, despite the fact that she looked like death and couldn't even sit up. I raised an eyebrow. I had seen plenty of women. Was she seriously worried about that right now? I was looking at her injury. Nice piercings, I remarked, unable to stop myself from trying to annoy her off. Hold still. 5 as expected, she gave me a cold glare, covering her nips. I frowned, looking down at the burnt, disgusting hand that I needed to remove. I'm going to take it out, I told her, impressed that she was still conscious. She nodded, closing her eyes. I grabbed her shoulder with one hand, holding her down and placing my knee on her stomach, before I yanked the hand from her chest. That was sickening. The smell of blood and burnt flesh filled my nose. She hissed in pain, her eyes blazing as she groaned in agony, blood splattered everywhere as I tossed it aside. She let out a whimper of pain and rolled over onto her side. I could see she was already healing. I think she heals a lot faster than I do. Thanks for saving me, she said, sounding a lot more normal again. Just don't do that shit again. Stay here until you're ready. We'll go at it again, I added quietly. She nodded. Just give me a couple of minutes, she replied hoarsely. I promised Elijah I'd keep her safe, and I plan to. Standing up, I turned back to the commotion all around us. Wolves in all directions were engaged in battle, but the enemy side was relentless and didn't seem to be dying. I saw Leo's huge wolf. It was almost on par with Rayhan's. He still had a few years to grow and he wasn't alpha yet, but I could sense his power radiating off of him as he slayed wolves without hesitation. I could see he was sticking close to Marcel, and realized he actually did think I would let him die. I took a deep breath and mind-linked 3 of my warriors who were closest, including Carmen, to shield Scarlet until she healed. Rayhan came over, his green eyes blazing, blood dripping from his fur and teeth that were holding some sort of fabric, which he placed around Scarlet's shoulders. Ever the gentleman, I turned away, knowing she was fine, and looked at the main target once more. He needs to go down. I assessed the carnage, trying to see how we could get close to him and actually do some damage. Wolves clashed with wolves in every direction. I needed the help of the witches. They were fully protected and offered our kind protection too. I knew that without them, we would probably have had a lot more losses by now. I glanced towards Maria. She was fighting a few wolves, but she wasn't overly exerting herself, saving herself for the last and final job. Darien wasn't far from her, and I knew he had the dagger, ready to pass it to her when the time came. 4 of the Black Storm Pack warriors surrounded her. Those were the ones we'd have to handle when the time came. They had been assigned by RAF to protect his Luna, and until now they kept that job. I turned to him, my eyes blazing with hatred. What do you want? We were willing to pay the debt if you told us what it was. I growled, launching myself at the Crimson King, trying to buy us some time. I knew exactly what the backstory was, but something told me the Escara's revenge was far gone and left behind. All that remained was the Jinn and his hunger for power. Once again, a blast of fire threw me back. This time I was ready and jumped aside as the ground trembled. 2 witches raised a barrier between us and his eyes flashed. Does his father still not know the answer? I shifted back, trying to reserve energy. I didn't miss the knowing smirk on his face. He knew I wasn't at my usual level. My men were going to begin to tire, unlike his wolves, which were relentless, just like they were the day Catalia was kidnapped. Well, obviously you're referring to my son. Well, guess what? Whatever you want, you won't get it, because no one touches my pups and gets away with it. I growled, mind-linking one of my men. Milo, my sword. Shame you won't be able to protect anyone. He spat with hatred. That's where you're wrong. I growled. The moment my hand touched the leather-bound long hilt, I smirked. Since I wasn't able to keep my Lycan form, we'll do this the other way. 6 foot long and half a foot wide, this bad boy was made to chop them to pieces. The moment it was in my hand, the weight of the adamantium steel was heavy yet perfectly comfortable in my hand. I ran at him, swinging it down. He jumped back, frowning as the blade hit the ground, creating a crack. I smirked coldly when the magic of 2 of the strongest witches on the planet helped create this. It was no ordinary weapon. Aegis from Del and Ri for my goth. You do not even know what that boy is. He spat, raising his hand and blocking the sword. Another Huie wave of power came my way. One of the witches blocked it as I sliced through the force, trying to get at least 1 or 2 hits in. I know exactly what he is. He's my son, one you tried to harm. I growled. I didn't want anyone to know the truth. As long as possible I wanted to keep it a secret, because if it got out, I didn't even want to know the consequences. What did you want him for? I hissed, as I swung my sword. I saw Scarlet, Rayhan, and Liam trying to get closer, but the sudden influx of wolves wasn't helping. What do you think? Draining his vessel of blood will give me a permanent form on this planet, and then, the world will be mine. I snarled. You ain't laying a finger on him. I spun around, feinting a hit, and this time my sword connected with his shoulder. I will. As we speak I'm getting closer and closer to him. He shouted manically, not caring for the blood that spurted from his shoulder. A sliver of fear washed through me, something in his eyes meant more. Darien. Get someone to find out what's happening back home. Tell Elijah to stay on alert. A huge wave of power slammed us back. I felt a few more bonds snap at once, feeling my pack members die. I was unable to look away from my target, knowing one wrong move and I'd be dead. He slammed me to the ground, just as the witch who was creating the barrier around me was cut down by him. I growled, as she crumbled to the floor. Take Olivia to safety. I commanded through the bond. Right now, we were one team, one side, and I was going to do my best for them all. I shielded her just as he raised his hand and sent a huge wave of fire straight towards me. Something about this power was different, whatever it touched would disintegrate instantly. I grabbed the bleeding witch and rolled over, but immediately another wave followed. This time I was ready for the impact, raising my sword in defense when I was shoved aside roughly. Alpha! I turned as Carmen's wolf stood where I was moments earlier, and right before my eyes, her body became a burnt carcass. I felt the bond break, my heart thudding as the burnt wolf crumbled to the ground. The fire was so powerful that she hadn't even shifted to her human form, burnt and frozen in wolf form. A lure of rage flashed through me, to every corner of my body. Carmen, she had been by my side from the start. No matter what, she was always there. My eyes flashed red, the taste of blood strong in my mouth as I shifted, dropping my weapon and launching myself at the monster. Not caring for the blasts of fire, Liam fell and stepped next to me. His aura was raging around him like a huge shield, and he now focused it towards the djinn, his eyes blazing as he threw him back with a huge wave of blue fire. The intensity sent waves across the entire grounds. I wondered how he and Kiera would work together in battle. That one would be pretty impressive to watch if ever the time came. I saw Scarlet run forward, her fur glowing under the setting sun. This was it, our last chance. Liam was thrown into the air. He shifted mid-throw, landing on his paws and growling at him, before he and Rayhan lunged at the so-called Crimson King. I saw Darien move towards Maria from the corner of my eyes. Her guards weren't around, which meant she had managed to get them to leave her. My heart clenched, knowing what was to come. Scarlet and I moved at the same time, as I fought the storm of emotions that consumed me. You will never defeat me. This time the voice held no trace of humanity, it was unearthly. I flinched as it grated into my bones. Splitting pain filled my head, but I still pushed forward, grabbing my sword and swinging it at him. Scarlet managed to throw him to the ground, the flames around him burning into her. I knew she wouldn't be able to last long, and dropping my sword, I was in front of them in a flash. I heard a witch chanting behind me, knowing she was one of the most powerful ones. Liam's aura surrounding Scarlet was the only thing keeping her alive as she pinned the man down. "I will never die," he hissed, a menacing grin crossing his face. "Never. That's about to change," I growled. My claws came out and I plunged my hand into his chest. "No." I froze, my heart thundering as I recognized that voice. Enrique, he shouldn't be here. Why was he here? The monster beneath me smiled victoriously. "Get him out of here," I growled at Liam through the link. The Jinn could take any one of the Escara blood as his host instantly. Thanks to the deal made long ago, Liam was by his side in an instant, picking him up and backing away, but it meant he wouldn't be able to hold the shield around Scarlet for long. "Please don't kill my padre," Enrique shouted over Liam's shoulder, as I felt an odd wave of power pulsating around the man beneath us. "Your father is Long Yon, kid, he's only a monster now," I shouted back, looking up at him. Our eyes met, and I realized I should never have let him go. The boy I had set free had been broken, but the battered, bruised boy in front of me was empty. Something told me he was far past the point of being fixed. Like the dying sun behind him, all hope seemed to have gone for him. If I killed his father in front of him. But I had to, for him and for us all. Through the sweat, blood, and pain, I knew no matter what, I had to do this. There was no other way. The odd pulsating was growing stronger. Was he trying to switch hosts? Barriers around the boy, I thundered, trying to plunge my hand into his chest, but he had something around him that was stopping me. Even with the witch's power assisting me, I could feel the fire biting through it. Soon if this continued, I wouldn't have a hand left. "He's mine!" the monster beneath me roared. "No, he isn't, you've destroyed him already," I hissed. "Please don't. My padre needs help." The boy's distant shouting came. "You said you'd help me." His cry was breaking and I knew I'd never forget it. "I'm sorry, kid. I'm sorry." A menacing growl ripped from my throat, and using my all, I managed to break through the barrier and tore his heart from his chest. Instantly, one of the witches obliterated it and both Scarlet and I were thrown back with incredible force as a huge explosion of fire erupted. Above everything, over the roaring of the Jinn, the screams and howls of the fighting wolves. All I heard was the piercing scream of anguish and despair of the young boy who had just lost his father. A huge surge of fire emitted from the dead body, taking on a fiery form of part man, with blazing eyes, horns, and a tail. He towered far above me, easily measuring over 10 feet tall as his aura threw us all back. The heat was burning our skin and I looked down at the dead body of what once used to be the alpha of the Fuego de Ceniza pack at his feet. "Keep your distance," I commanded, before darting forward. I may have killed him, but I needed to get his body for the pup. "Al!" Marcel growled. "Al, yet back!" Darien shouted through the link. "Tignered them," but before I could even get to the body, the Jinn stepped on him, instantly turning him to a burned crisp. My heart plummeted and I jumped back. "Don't let it touch you. One touch and you're burnt toast," I growled. The Jinn let out an unearthly roar, waving his fiery tail. IL connected with two wolves, one of his own and one of ours. I felt the shap as I lost yet another man. The Fuego de Ceniza pack were without an alpha. But it was obvious whatever magic was on these wolves meant they were under the Jinn's command. I couldn't command them to step down as a whole because even our side would fall to my command. Liam was gone and I was glad. We needed that pup far away. The witches were trying to contain the Jinn from advancing, but we were failing. She's ready. Darien's voice came through the link. My heart thundered, and I looked at Maria, who was far behind the Jinn. Her grey eyes met mine and I felt the agonizing pain of what was to come. I had already lost several, but to know I was going to lose her. Her hair was hidden beneath a turban-like black scarf, which also covered her face. She was dressed in complete black, her signature look of flared pants, fully covered. Only her eyes could be seen, her long curved swords in her hands. I love you, and I'm going to miss you. I said hoarsely through the link, hoping she heard, and if she did, I knew she wouldn't be able to answer. I saw her eyes sparkle with unshed tears, yet the crinkle on the corner of her eyes told me she was smiling, she was happy. This was it. The time had come. Letting out a howl of rage, I shifted, ready to keep him occupied so she could do what she needed to. Forgive me for not being able to keep her happy, RAF. Elijah. I had just done the round of the pack grounds, when I had felt a searing pain that made me double over. Scarlet fear enveloped me as the pain blinded me, making several men run to me, but soon it was gone, and I knew she was okay. I hadn't felt the bond snap. Unlike the rest of the pack who were tied to Liam, my mate was the only one bound to me. She needed to be okay. Whatever had happened had been a close call, and although I wanted to get someone to find out, they needed to focus on the battle. It took me a few moments to regain myself before I entered the Night Walker's headquarters to go have a look to see if Kiera was okay. Dr. Callum was waiting for me inside, as he needed to administer the dose to keep her weakened and unconscious. A few guards and others working were carrying on with their jobs, but the tension that hung in the air was obvious. Several gave me a polite nod as I walked past and headed down to the cells. Two of the guards flanked the door, and Dr. Callum was already there, his kit in hand. Alpha Elijah. Doctor. He gave a small nod and a forced smile, but it was obvious he didn't like doing this. Neither did I, but there wasn't much we could do but keep her sedated. I frowned deeply, remembering what Alejandro had said about Dante and what he was. It had been shocking, to say the least, but it made sense. Dante was the only one with such a powerful aura from birth, even alpha pups did not hold that. He knew far more than Liam and Kiera's intuition. But the Jinn also knew his truth, and the fact he wanted him meant he would go to any lengths to get him. We needed to make sure Kiera was kept unconscious no matter what. I keyed in the code Alejandro had changed specifically so no one else knew it but me. I stepped inside, shutting the door behind Dr. Callum. We just need to keep her unconscious for a while longer. I do hope the king can deal with this threat immediately, so I don't have to do this to my queen. Callum said gravely. It was taking a toll on him, I could see it in his eyes. I am sorry that you're the one who has to do this considering you are a doctor, but it is for Kiera's own sake as well. I said quietly as we walked down the steps to the cold dark cells. There she was, lying on a slab of silver, chains wrapped around her, her arms and ankles cuffed. It was almost as if she was simply sleeping, her heart beating steadily despite the fact that it was weaker than normal. I unlocked the cell door and we stepped inside. The sound of the keys chinking echoed in the quietness. I hated seeing her like this and I wondered how Alejandro must have felt having to leave his own mate beneath the grounds of his pack and go to battle. I had seen the pain in his eyes, but he remained strong, like always. The stains of dried blood around her wrists made me frown. She must have woken up at some point, as the restraints had been pulled at causing her to bleed. Callum opened his pack of supplies, walking forward when I suddenly grabbed his arm, pulling him back. Wait. Alpha, he looked at me and I shook my head, motioning with my eyes at the restraints. He frowned before following my gaze, his frown vanishing as he realized what I was pointing out. Kiera should have been in a state where she couldn't even wake up, let alone fight against her bindings. Go, I mouthed to Callum, taking the syringe from him and stepping closer to the table. I paused, my eyes flashing as I motioned for him to leave. If something happened, I needed to make sure we were locked in here. She couldn't get out. The moment I was within reach, her eyes snapped open, deep orange burning brightly as she shot up, grabbing my neck locket. I growled at Callum, aiming to slam the syringe into Kiera, but she knocked my hand aside, jumping up from the bindings she had already broken. Not so fast. She hissed, lunging at me, and I felt a sliver of fear rush through me. I couldn't hurt her. Kiera. She smiled coldly, running to the cell door, but I grabbed her by the arm, pulling her back. She lashed out and we both hit the table she had been lying on. Her claws came out, as she bared her teeth at me. My own eyes flashed as I pushed her back before grabbing her arm and slarming her against the wall, just as Callum managed to lock the door. Leaving me here with Kiera, open it, she commanded, her aura swirling around her. Her claws were digging into my arm. Callum Vio. Now. I growled venomously. He frowned, forcing himself away from the keys, knowing his wolf wanted to obey his queen. I'll call for help. No. No one from this pack is to come down here. I growled, my eyes fixed on Kiera, who shoved me off and stood up. Raven, Kiera's awake. I need you to get Rayhana to make sure the pack members stay away from the cells. If Kiera commands them to help her, they will not be able to deny her request for the most part. Shit. Okay, got it. I'll tell Rayhana now. Do you need my help? I don't think she can mind link, just make sure no one gets close. I'll deal with Kiera. Got it. I cut the link, knowing Raven and Rayhana would handle the rest, and I'll handle my daughter. She smiled, a smile that was so much like Kiera's that for a moment I wondered if she had any control. What's wrong? Scared that now I'm the queen you won't be able to handle me? I'm still your father. I said quietly, my eyes blazing cobalt blue. Although I knew I'd never be able to hurt her, I knew the faster I took her down, the better. Game on, Papa. She said mockingly. At once, we both sprang at the other. Her purple aura mixed with orange, wrapping around her, but it wasn't anywhere as powerful as usual, and in that moment, I realized he could never completely control her. Kiera's power came from the light. From the moon itself, something evil and dark could never control it. With this theory, I suddenly stilled, something she hadn't been expected, but I knew deep down my girl was in there. Her eyes flickered, just as her hand connected with my chest, the impact far less than it should have been. Kiera was still in there. I smirked and stabbed the syringe into her neck, using her hesitation to help me. Her eyes widened in shock before the orange gave way to the familiar blue-rimmed green eyes. Eyes that were filled with pain, guilt, and sadness. "Dad, I'm here, Princess," I said quietly, pulling her into my arms. "It's not sail, I'm not safe." "Leave." Her body was becoming heavy, and she soon slumped in my arms, unconscious. "Everything will be okay." I lifted her up, placing her on the silver. "Raven, get Dr. Callum to come back down, we need to up her dosage," I frowned, caressing her hair. How was it possible for her to have broken free of these cuffs? Her body was bound and kept subdued. Where did the Jinn get the energy from? Was he somehow pulling on Alejandro's power through the bond? This was a magic and power beyond my understanding. I heard footsteps soon after, and Serena and Callum both came hurrying over. "Alpha, never ask me to do something so risky ever again," he said, looking as if he had aged a few years. I raised an eyebrow. "Look at these cuffs." She broke through them somehow, she was fully unconscious. "How is that even possible?" I mused as Callum administered another round of drugs. "Is it possible that his hold on her is getting stronger and he's beginning to take over?" Callum murmured. I shook my head. "He can't possess her unless he is physically here. He did something to attain a hold on her, but he isn't in her, if that makes sense." The elder witch explained that clearly. "But then how did he wake up?" Serena asked worriedly. "I don't know, he has to be drawing strength from somewhere," I said quietly. Serena frowned, her eyes thoughtful as she felt Kiera's pulse. "It's so weak," she stroked her hair, and I could see she loved her Luna. "We need new chains," I said quietly. "I've asked Drake to bring some more chains and cuffs," Serena replied unhappily. Callum paused, before he suddenly looked up sharply. "I have a hypothesis, but I am uncertain if there is any truth or logic in it," he seemed hesitant as he looked down at Kiera. "What is it?" I asked. He seemed to struggle before he bent down, placing his ear against Kiera's stomach. "You said he needs to be drawing strength from somewhere. My assumption was, well, spit it out." I growled impatiently. Well, what if the Luna is pregnant? The Jinn may be drawing his strength from the fetus." I looked at him sharply. "Kiera is pregnant?" I was sure she was done with kids. Serena's eyes were wide with shock. I simply watched Callum waiting for his verdict. He moved back slowly, his face looking thoughtful. "I'm not sure. Perhaps Alpha, you can check, your hearing would be better than mine, but if that's true, and we are here binding her in silver," Serena murmured. "But the Luna heals, it would make sense. If the Jinn is constantly using an unborn fetus to survive and Kiera is fueling it with her healing, it's a winning situation for the demon," Callum said quietly. I didn't reply, pressing my ear to Kiera's stomach and closing my eyes. Trying to focus, straining my ears, the sound of Kiera's heart, Serena's, Callum's, mine, and there it was. The tiny beat of a fifth heart. I jerked back, looking at Callum shocked. Well? He looked at me with concern. I think she is, I whispered, unable to make anything of the shocking revelation, as I tried to process it all. Then we need to move her to the hospital. We can place her in one of the secure rooms that were used for rabid wolves or those who had been poisoned by the Wendigos and Manangals years ago. Callum said worriedly. We need to make sure this poison and silver we have been giving her hasn't harmed the baby. Even though she has the gift of healing, we need to be careful. I nodded, fear twisting in my guts. If Alejandro learned of this, if he realized she was pregnant all along and something happened to the baby, he would never be able to forgive himself. Darien just had one of the backup call to ask if everything is okay here. What do we say? Serena asked, looking at me for answers. Just tell them Kiera woke up, but she's sedated once again, and everything is fine. I said firmly before turning to Callum. Keep her sedated, up the dosage. I will place guards from the Blood Moon to watch her so she cannot command them like her own pack. As for the baby, get a scan done, make sure it's okay. The most we can do is hope that Alejandro and the rest succeed in tonight's battle quickly and efficiently. The severity of the situation was worsening, and everything was hanging in the balance. I picked Kiera up and carried her out of the cells, mind-linking my men on what their new orders were. I placed a kiss on my princess' forehead, hating that she was going through so much. 20 minutes later, Kiera was set up in one of the holding rooms on the secure floor of the hospital, with 10 of the Blood Moon men on guard. Callum was inside with a sonography machine. He carried out the scan whilst Serena and I waited with bated breath. Ah, it's there. It's still very small, I'm assuming she became pregnant not long ago, after she lost her memory. I stated, and Callum nodded. It would make sense, perhaps she was no longer taking her contraception. Well, that was on Alejandro, he should have been more careful. I frowned in concern, looking at the screen. And is it healthy? I asked the question that I knew was on both my and Serena's mind. Yes, it's weak, but that's to be expected. She is sedated, however otherwise it seems well. Callum replied, sounding relieved. A wave of relief washed over me, and I exhaled. Thank the goddess, but I didn't get to revel in that revelation because Raven mind-linked me, panic and fear in her voice. Uncle! We need you here. Her voice was distraught, and it made my mind race, thinking of 1,000 reasons that could be behind it. Raven! What is it? I asked, my heart skipping a beat. It's Dulsanra. She's Rayhana can't do anything. Goddess! Nothing is working. She's not breathing. Dulsanra's stopped breathing. Please no. Rayhan, this was it. I saw Mom and Uncle exchange looks, almost as if Uncle was trying to relay a message. I didn't need to be able to read minds to know what was on his mind. The emotions in his eyes spoke louder than words ever could. If there was any doubt that maybe Dante was wrong and this wasn't going to happen, it now vanished. That exchange said it all. I saw the pain in Uncle's eyes before he lunged at the djinn, hatred and anger clear in his eyes as he roared. His aura radiated off of him. The djinn intercepted him, knocking him back and roaring in an unearthly way, his fiery body illuminating the darkening skies. He will not be able to hold that form for too long, but it gives him enough time to find a new host. Someone shouted. Time was running out. A clash of attacks were happening in all directions, and I took a moment to try to assess our next move. When all hope is lost, one right now, we were holding well. When was the right moment? And how was I meant to work with the one guy who hated me the most? I looked over at Leo. His huge wolf was an impressive sight. He was truly an alpha wolf. His brown fur that held hints of steely blue was matted with blood, but it did nothing to dull his power or magnificence. A true beast that matched the Rossies, and deep down, I wondered if Dante was right. Would he really help me? Would he care if Mom was killed? A shrill, painful roar left the Jinn's mouth, the flames growing higher, and we were all thrown back. Liam had returned, but even his power was doing nothing other than holding off the heal a little. His aura raged around him powerfully as the Jinn lunged at him. Liam ducked, moving aside as he met him mid-attack. The witches were doing their best, and as I cut down another wolf, I felt the ground tremble beneath me. I cut down 2 more wolves, wishing they weren't simply his puppets. Puppets? Just like those under Endora. Uncle's words about some of the Sangui Pack members still played on my mind, and I couldn't forget the little boy's cries of pain. Would he become another Leo? Would he hate us? The situation was different, but the smell of blood, burnt flesh, and smoke hung in the air. Soon all I could see was the black smoke that was making it harder to breathe. The Jinn was not being affected by anything. No matter how many times someone managed to touch him, it did nothing to injure him, but he was in turn burning those around him to death or close enough. My stomach twisted as I watched one of the betas from another pack attack the Jinn, but the moment he made impact, he was burnt entirely. How do we get close? Or at least stop those who did manage to get close from dying instantly? The ground beneath us erupted, throwing us back violently. A sharp rock hit my left flank and I was tossed to the ground like I didn't weigh a thing. This. I saw Uncle jump up, his sword raised and his aura visible against the flames, like black waves enveloping his body. So only alpha-level wolves were able to get close and not die. That hacked down our numbers vastly, but it was obvious Uncle had clicked on too. Get your men from beta rank and below to back off. Everyone is to hold the attacking wolves at bay. Alpha blood and witches are to step forward. Uncle's voice came through the link. Frowning, I relayed the message to my pack. Got it, Alpha? Yes, Alpha. 7 alphas, 2 ex-lunas, and 15 more of alpha blood all stepped forward, along with 13 witches. Our pack members created a wall around us, fending off the attacking wolves. The witches were at the back, the sound of their chanting only growing louder. When all hope feels like it's lost, the power around me was immense. It felt as if we had cornered the Jinn as each alpha-blooded werewolf attacked him, with protective shields created around every werewolf here. What did he mean? The Jinn was beginning to struggle to block all the attacks. We would win, right? The Jinn's flames and aura were diminishing. I jumped, swiping my claws across his face. His eyes filled with hatred as he turned his gaze on me. This is for my kitten. With renewed hatred and anger, I attacked again, but with each passing moment, it was becoming increasingly obvious that he wasn't going to die. Every one of us who attacked was being thrown aside like rag dolls. I growled, seeing Chris being slammed to the ground, instantly shifting back to human form. His entire body was covered in blood, and I could see a heavy injury on his shoulder and neck. I growled in anger, running over to him and pulling him to safety. He was injured, but he was alive. I frowned, sensing Rayhana's powers around him, and smiled internally. His woman definitely wouldn't send him to battle without backup. Whatever she had done had stopped him from having his head ripped off. I turned back, hearing a scream as Auntie Red was thrown in the air, blood spraying down on us, making me flinch when her human form hit the ground. Blood as red as her hair covered her body. She was someone I would never want to fight in battle, violent, dangerous, and aggressive. Whatever she had done made the Jinn stagger as he tried to regain himself, black smoke coming out of his ribs. His power kept steady but his rage was now directed at Auntie Red. He launched himself towards her, ready to tear her to shreds, but Uncle Al and Marcel attacked him, cutting off his path. He roared in rage, slamming them both back. Uncle was in human form, and I could tell he was weakening. Despite that he remained strong, commanding, and assessing the situations. Always at the heart of the battle. I will never die. The Jinn hissed in a voice that was not for this earth. I felt it inside, the shuddering power in it instilling fear in those who heard it. His gaze was on Uncle, before he sank his claws into his shoulders. I felt an odd pulsating that I had felt earlier oozing off of him. Uncle let out a roar of agony that filled the air. "Do not fight me! Or I will kill all!" He hissed venomously. With sudden realization, it hit me. He was trying to take him as a host. I saw the flash of silver from the corner of my eyes as Darien handed something to Mom. The dagger. I looked at Idu who had just failed at another attempted attack, his eyes blazing with rage. As if sensing me watching him, he turned his attention to me, our eyes met and I knew this was the time. From the corner of my eye, I saw the Jinn dig his flaming claws into Uncle's chest, slamming him to the ground. We had to do this. He gave me the slightest nod before he broke into a run towards Mom, just as Marcel attacked the Jinn, causing Leo to hesitate when he was thrown to the ground once again, a mess, but I would let him know I was here. The Jinn turned his gaze upon Marcel. A shrill whistling hiss filled the air, a black smoke emitting from his shoulder. Marcel had done some damage, and it was obvious the Jinn wanted him dead. I jumped in the way, growling ferociously. Leo needed to know we wouldn't leave Marcel to die. I saw him glance at his father before he ran towards Mom, who had broken into a run. "Leo, you can do this." I jumped at the Jinn, but even though he was fighting back with one arm, he was still powerful. I saw Darien being knocked to the ground by an immense wave of power. The Jinn's hold on Uncle remained throughout, the flames beginning to wrap around his body. Even the witch's shield around Uncle was failing. He had managed to kill a few of them as well. A few alphas had died too. Time was running out. I looked at Mom, who was dodging attack after attack. She was fast and lithe. When she jumped, spinning in the sky, she was the perfect example of the Ahmar Kamar fighting style. Her father would have been truly proud. A flash of brown and blue crossed my vision, then Leo had his jaw around her waist, knocking her out of the air. I heard her gasp. She hadn't been expecting an attack from one of our own. "Leo, You fool! Marcel thundered from where he was staggering to his feet. Mom knocked Leo back, her eyes flashing with rage. She had been close. Leo! Don't do this! She shouted as Leo shifted back. I don't follow rules. He growled, grabbing her arm and ripping the weapon from her grip. Leo! Her anger was palpable, but Leo ignored her, holding her in a death grip before he turned to me and threw the dagger. I shifted back. Mom gasped just as the Jinn turned, realization hitting him as he stared at the blade that I'd just caught. A virgin blade, the same term that Dante had used. A term I hadn't heard from anyone before Dante. The fear in the Jinn as he slammed Leo and Mom to the ground before he began advancing towards me was clear, his aura of fire growing as he turned his gaze on me. I wasn't going to make it. No, it's not. The time is. I have time. I have time, the Jinn was rambling, his fury growing. I scanned the area, Auntie Red was down. Chris, Marcel, Uncle. They were alive thanks to the barriers made by Liam and the witches. But aside from Darien, Liam, Mom, Leo, and I, everyone else was out. When all hope is lost, look for the man in black. But there was no one. The time of the werewolves is over. The time of the witches is over. The time for the immortals has arrived, the Jinn hissed, sparks flying from his mouth as he spat the words out. No one can kill me. No mere werewolf scum. He hissed. I would do it. The man in black, I'll kill. Agony ripped through me, and I felt an excruciating pain tear into me and wrap around my heart. Fear enveloped me as I realized what this was. Dulsanra. She was dying. No. Die, son of Selene. Ray, Uncle growled, managing to rip free from the Jinn's hold. I don't know how he was walking, the number of injuries in his body. He looked like death, yet the will in his eyes didn't diminish. The Jinn let out a mighty roar, raising his arm. Uncle stepped in front of me, shielding me. Even this close to death he still held the power and strength that came from within. He was a true king, and I knew he was ready to die for me. Just then, a blinding deep red glow filled the air. It was far darker and deeper than the orangey red of the Jinn. I shielded my eyes, blinded by the intensity and power of the aura that now clashed against the Jinn's. It diminished and there, a few meters away, stood a man. He was lean, tall, and muscular, wearing all black with a black cloak around his shoulders, but what got to me was that his clothing was similar to Mom's. He had his hood up, and a black mask covered his face. His hands were gloved and the only part of him that was visible were his eyes. The Jinn hissed, and I could sense his fear. You! There's no way you could be here. I chose the right time. You were destined to die by my hand, no matter where and when. He replied quietly. His voice was low and husky, yet it held a melodic hum to it. Uncle was tense, but I knew what I needed to do. The man held his hand out as if expecting it, and I threw the dagger at him. He caught it without even looking at me just as the Jinn roared, his aura blasting away the barriers. Fear, rage, and desperation were clear in his eyes. We were all blasted back, our bodies beginning to burn with the heat of the fire from the Jinn. I have waited too long. You cannot kill me. I hold the fire within me. Your time has come. The masked man said quietly, yet the power that he held seemed to seep through us all. His voice held nothing but calmness and, in a flash, he was right in front of the Jinn, unbothered by the blazing fire that was radiating off him. I saw a flicker of a black tail from under his cloak and I smiled slightly. A demon. Somehow, Dante knew a demon would come. He raised the dagger and a huge wave of power swirled around him, pushing past the flames of the Jinn. The Jinn jumped up in the air, but it didn't deter the demon. He held the dagger firmly, and I felt a sense of déjà vu as he pushed off and flipped it in the air like how Mom had, before he plunged the dagger into the Jinn's chest. A terrorizing scream left the Jinn as a tidal wave of power caused a tsunami. We were all lifted from the ground and thrown back. Nobody was able to withstand it, even trees were ripped from their roots. I shielded my eyes, staring up at the two kinds of demon in the center. The man in black held strong, despite the waves of power that rolled off the Jinn. Through the pain of the breaking bond, my fear, and the ray of hope, I saw the Jinn beginning to blacken and cracks began to appear in him. A final fierce scream of despair left him as he stared at the night sky, his arms raised in hopelessness. I think I hit my head harder than I thought, I heard Uncle mutter. I almost smiled. Uncle never lost his ability to comment, but my eyes were on the two before us, watching as the Jinn seemed to explode. Then silence. I felt the pain that had been crushing me inside vanish and I knew Dulsanra was okay. Relief flooded me, the bond was intact. The mystery man turned towards me, deep red eyes rimmed with thick black lashes met mine, and an odd wave of familiarity washed over me. 13 we won, he murmured, winking at me, before a huge flash of deep red light filled the sky. Then he was only behind the dryer that had fulfilled its purpose. Tuo was the first to rise, walking over to the digger. He picked it up, interest clear in his piercing blue yes before he smirked like the predator he is. Well, that sure was fun. Rayhana, my heart pounded with fear when Dulsanra's heart stopped beating. I jumped up from the bed, chanting a spell trying to heal her or do anything to bring her heartbeat back. Goddesses above, help me! Dulsanra! You are not leaving me! I cried out. I need help! Her heart! No! No! Aaron, who had been playing on the bed, froze in panic at my shouting, his eyes pooling with tears. I need someone! I screamed. Where were the guards? Hold on, girl, hold on! Dulsanra! The door burst open as Raven appeared with Dante, Azura, and the twins. Teleport her to the hospital, she said to me, scooping Aaron up. She's not breathing! I exclaimed. Calm down. She's going to be fine. Dante interrupted, staring at Dulsanra. Despite the calm in his voice, his heart was thumping and his hands were shaking as he approached her. She's going to be okay. She has to, he whispered, staring down at her as he took her hand in his. Then why are you terrified? I whispered fearfully, before shaking my head and chanting another spell of healing. It couldn't be her time. Not yet. Raven had run out and I was sure it was to call a doctor, but it wasn't going to help. Her heart had stopped. I knew it hadn't even been a minute, but it felt like eternity as I did my best, trying to use every spell I could think of. Was I wrong? Dante whispered, his face pale. What was he going on about? The girls stood silently, fear in their eyes. Catalia looked fearful, Skyla was frowning, whilst Azura was scanning the room as if it'd give her an answer. "We need to shock her awake," she said in a panicked whisper. Like a lightning bolt, a jolt. She was right, we may not have the machinery here, but I could use a spell. I could. Dulsanra's eyes flew open just as Dante gasped, staggering back. A darkness emitted from them, followed by a blinding light, and before my very eyes their skin returned to normal. The veins vanishing and color returning to them. The bright light and that surge of power vanished, and I wasn't the only one to sigh in relief. Dulsanra shot straight up in bed, her eyes blazing red, looking as beautiful as she did the first time I saw her in her demon form. Dante's eyes seemed to sharpen as he rolled his neck, removing the kinks from it. "Ri?" Dulsanra whispered. Her voice was hoarse despite the fact that her pale skin was glowing, and her hair seemed to be full of life. "Thank the goddesses! I could kiss you right now!" I exclaimed, flinging my arms around her, hugging her tightly. My best friend! Goddess, my best friend was okay. That scared me for a moment. Dante muttered, frowning slightly. When I looked up at him, wiping my tears. "Ah, my poor baby! You looked terrified too. Come here," I said, pulling him into a tight hug. "Let go of me," he retorted, trying to pull away. "I wasn't scared. Weren't you?" Dulsanra asked teasingly before she smiled at the girls who stood there looking relieved. 2 doctors, Uncle L, Raven, and 2 guards appeared in the doorway. "Not at all," Dante said, quietly looking at Dulsanra, before glaring at me. "Let me go, you're squishing me." I raised an eyebrow before letting go of him. It was good to have him back. "Thank Uncle L," muttered, hugging Raven, who was grinning happily. "This means they did it right," she said, kissing Aren's cheek. "They did it." Uncle L replied with a nod, exhaling in relief. "Did it?" Aren repeated before he giggled and hid his face in Raven's shoulder, then jumped up as if just realizing Dulsanra was awake. "Mama! To my baby!" Dulsanra whispered, her eyes full of emotion as Raven brought him over. "Once Sienna's asleep, I'll go get her," she said gently. Dulsanra smiled, trying to control her tears before she hugged him tightly, rocking him gently. Dante watched them, and for some reason, he looked sad and happy at the same time. "Hey, what's up?" I asked him. He shook his head, shrugging, before he turned and brushed past the guards and left. I frowned, feeling concerned as Skyla jumped onto the bed. "We thought you died," Azura stated bluntly. "We were thinking we had to bury you," Skyla added dramatically. "We knew you were going to be okay because Daddy promised," Catalia added, making Dulsanra chuckle. "I missed you girls too," she replied, ruffling their hair. "This means it's over," Uncle L said, running his hands through his gorgeous sandy brown locks. "And it means our mates are okay," I added, feeling my chest feel lighter, but with it, my heart suddenly plummeted. It meant Mom was gone. Suddenly, I felt my own body become numb and I excused myself from the room. Before the tears came, I needed to be alone. One, she's alive. I froze, turning and looking at Dante, who stood there. What? I asked, refusing to cry. Mama Mari is alive. He repeated. Confusion hit me and my head spun. What? How? She was. It's not her time. He said quietly, looking down. I sighed, placing a hand on my heart. Was it selfish that I was relieved she was okay? I promise I'll work on something, even if it's by using magic. I will make sure Mom stays strong. Dante was glancing at the open bedroom door, and I crouched down in front of him. Tell me, my alpha prince, why are you behaving weirdly? Shouldn't you be in there so when Rayhan comes back you can annoy him off and say you were by her side when she woke up? I told Rayhan that if he followed the plan, that I'll let Dulsanra go, so I can't keep annoying him anymore. I have to stop. 3. I frowned. What? Rayhan knew? Dante knew. Okay, my mind was spinning, but I'll get the deets later. For now, I needed to handle this. So let me get this straight, you asked Rayhan to help you to save Mom, to save everyone from being sacrificed, and you have to give up crushing on Dulsanra? I find your crush really cute. And if Rayhan has an issue, I will handle him. What making you do that? What the heck? Let him come back. R.I. Dante snapped his fingers in front of me, a frown on his cute little handsome face. What? I growled. Calm down, why are women so emotional? Geesh, it's fine. I need to behave. Mom and Dad keep telling me to anyway. I need to realize she is Rayhan's. Despite his words, he rolled his eyes, making me chuckle. Yes, but you know, even if you aren't going to pursue her, you can still be her friend. I suggested, wiggling my eyebrows. No one said you have to avoid her like the plague. Seriously, Rayhan needed a smack. He nodded, smirking slightly. That's true. See. I stood up, crossing my arms. Let's go inside. He nodded, before pausing. Don't tell anyone about this conversation. Or that I admitted that she's, he warned me, trailing off as he glared at me. I frowned despite the amusement I was feeling inside. I'm not a tattletale. That's your dad's talent, or your Uncle Liam's. I shot back. Maybe, but either way, if you don't tell anyone, then I will tell you about your baby. I narrowed my eyes. Oh, you little brat, you know the gender, don't you? Maybe. He replied haughtily. I frowned as he smirked arrogantly. So it's your choice. Fine, I won't tell anyone about our conversation, good. He gave me a once-over before walking back into the room. I smiled. Our little alpha prince was back, and so was my best friend. Now I just need Chris back, so we could link until we drop, because I swear, the moment I see my man, I'm not letting him rest. My smile vanished and I frowned. I had felt the pain through the bond. I knew he was injured, but he was alive. I was scared of losing him, but I won't admit that. I'll just scold him for being careless. My annoying man. I almost bumped into Uncle L as I entered the room. I'm going to go see Kiera, he said. I smiled and nodded. I'm sure she's okay. I'll come with you. Me too. Raven added, then hesitated. Will you be okay? She asked Dulsanra. Of course, besides, I have Dante here to help if I need him. Dulsanra said with a wink at the boy who was acting so awkwardly that he was making it obvious that something was up. He shrugged, pretending to be unbothered, only making Dulsanra more curious. I'm here too. Claire said politely, she had just entered. Perfect then. I said as the three of us left the room. Can I come see Mama too? Catalia asked. Uncle L nodded and held his hand out to her. Of course, you can. Come on. Alejandro, it was over, the aftermath was horrific, but we were done. The Fuego de Ceniza wolves instantly seemed to change in color, taking on hues of different colors. They were mostly of warm colors, but there were changes in them, the biggest being their eye colors and their demeanors. From brutal killing machines, they suddenly became wary and alert as they backed away. Their eyes were full of emotions. Our own were tending to the injured and dead, passing around pants and shirts for those who needed them. Shift! I commanded coldly, tightening the drawstring on my baggy shorts that were a mess with blood and dirt. They did, and I was surprised that half were still on their feet. Give them clothes. I commanded through the link. Return home. You're free from the curse of the Jinn. He no longer has any power over your Alpha's family. I said coldly. They exchanged looks before one of them stepped forward. We apologize for everything. Please don't punish us. I already said you can go. Liam, bring the pup. I commanded. He nodded, seemingly mind-linking someone before I heard footsteps and two Blood Moon warriors alongside a witch came leading the young boy. He stared ahead blankly, and I crouched down before him. Instantly several wolves from his pack tensed and a few ran forward. I cast them one last cold glare before looking at the young boy. Do you want to come home with me? I asked quietly, placing my hand on his shoulder. My home is in Puerto Rico. He said emotionlessly, not looking me in the eye. You can start a new life here. If you want, I would happily take you under my wing. I and Kiara can take care of you. When you're old enough you can return to Puerto Rico and take your place as Alpha if you so wish. I can make sure you get to visit. No, thank you. You have done enough. He cut in bitterly. He looked around at the ground that was covered in blood and bodies. I knew no matter what I said, he wouldn't change his mind. I nodded and stood up, looking at the pack members. Before you leave, I need to make sure this pack takes care of him. Does he have family in Puerto Rico? I asked, knowing that many of them had family they hadn't seen in ages. The werewolves split as an older man walked through the middle, his face solemn. In his smart suit, he didn't seem to fit in with the rest of us who were covered in injuries, blood, soot, and sweat. He held a cane in hand. I vouch that the young master will be safe. He does have family and a pack that loves him. We were just bound to the devil without a choice. We will forever be indebted to the Lycan king and his army for defeating this monster. We are not indebted. Let's go home. Enrique cut in, his eyes full of anger as he looked at me. Killing isn't the answer. The Queen Luna said kindness was the answer, but she was wrong too. I frowned, as he turned away and walked off through the group of his people, who parted, letting him through, bowing their heads to their future alpha. One violence wasn't the answer. No matter how much we did, there was so much more that needed to change. The man bowed, passing me his card. We will keep in touch so you can rest assured the young master will be safe. Don't take his words to heart, he is just hurting. And you don't seem to care that I killed your alpha. I remarked coldly, taking a bottle of water from a warrior who was offering it to me and gulping it down. I was thirsty. He was far too gone to save, but I have never seen the young master as healthy as he was after being in your care. That in itself says more to me than anything you say verbally. Thank you for taking care of him and remembering he is a child. I will look forward to your call. Yeah, I will call you soon. If the pup needs anything, I'm here. If you need assistance in returning to Puerto Rico, I am willing to help. I will also want to ask a few questions regarding everything that happened and to the extent of what your people know. I said. I would ask them if they knew about Dante's truth, and if they did, I wanted it kept hidden. As for the pup, even if it's from the shadows, I plan to help in any way I can. I added quietly. Thank you, Alpha King. We'll discuss this more when I'm a little rested. You can go, I have your number. I will call. I said, my entire body was aching, but the moment that he died, I had a burst of energy that I had been deprived of thanks to the poison. He bowed his head before mind-linking his men something, and they all backed away, some carrying the dead and injured. I turned back to my own people. Scarlet was bent over Carmen's wolf. She was already healed. She touched Carmen's burnt wolf only for part of her body to crumble. She was burnt to a crisp, which meant we couldn't move her. Someone collect the ashes of those we are unable to move. I commanded, emotionlessly walking over to Carmen. I looked down at her, wondering if I ever told her that I did appreciate her and admired her skill. She was a good head warrior, brave, smart, and skilled, but now was a tad too late. I turned away, searching for Maria. I spotted her standing to the side, her long black hair billowing around her, her arms wrapped around her slim frame. Rayhan was trying to talk to her, but she was refusing to listen to him. Tell me, not even once. Rayhan was asking her. Not now, Yahayatai. She replied, her voice was bleak and it killed. As much as I was happy she was here, hearing her sound so defeated sucked. Rayhan, can you call home, make sure everyone's okay? I asked. He looked at me, hesitating for a moment, but I knew for his mate he would agree. Sure enough, he nodded, glancing between Maria and me before running off. Was this your plan? She asked, hurt clear in her eyes as she looked at me accusingly. I sighed. No, it wasn't. I don't even know who that guy was or how Leo and Rayhan were working together. I said, placing my hands on her shoulders. She didn't respond, staring at the ground, her body tense. Maria, she refused to look at me, her chest heaving as she tried to control her emotions. I sighed, pulling her into my arms, hugging her forcefully. She may be strong, as she tried to pull away, but I was stronger. I'm sorry. I know you were looking forward to seeing him, but it wasn't meant to be. Maybe RAF didn't want you to do this. I said quietly, not sure how to explain what had happened. I said goodbye. I was ready to meet him, I was so close, and then, that chance was pulled away from me. She whispered. I know, and call me selfish, but I'm glad you're still here. We all still need you, Mari. She didn't respond, but her body relaxed a bit as I rubbed her back. You really need to eat, I remarked. I can feel your bones. She pulled away, giving me a scathing glare. I'm perfectly fine as I am. He doesn't know any boundaries. Scarlett added, making me smirk arrogantly. Or how to not speak everything that crosses his mind. Still holding a grudge about that comment I made earlier. I taunted. Who would have thought we'd have that in common? Her eyes flashed. She sure wasn't Elijah, and if Liam didn't step in, I'm sure she would have lunged at me. Mom, relax, what's wrong? Nothing. She growled as I smirked tauntingly back at her. Westwood women. I swear I won't ever admit it out loud, but Kiera was definitely more like Elijah. As for the little crackpot, she was like her mother. It seems like Liam was the common peacemaker. My smirk faded away as I looked at Leo, who was smoking a cigarette, just as Rayhan returned, a smile on his face. They're all okay, all of them, he said, relief clear in his voice. Thank the goddess, Maria murmured, a hand on her heart. I knew they would be, and I felt even more relaxed knowing my queen and family were fine. Things were finally going to be okay. Crossing my arms, I turned and looked at my two nephews. Do you two want to explain what that was that you guys pulled? I asked coldly. Yeah, I want to know too, Marcel added, frowning coldly. Leo shrugged. In nothing but his sweatpants I could see he already had a vast number of tattoos, a lot more than I had at 18. You might want to ask your own FKR first, he replied coldly. Dante. Yeah, unless you got another. Leo shot back. He knew what he was doing, obviously. No one died, Rayhan said seriously and quietly, looking back at his mom, sadness and an apology clear in his eyes. He said, it's not your time, I'm sorry. Silence ensued. One thing was clear, if Dante had said it, it meant something. For him to know what was to happen, and the fact he knew we'd get help, was intense. The level of his power was worrying. I needed to make sure he was safe until he was ready to protect himself. The fact he was put on Earth meant there was a purpose, and I would be lying to say that didn't worry me. There's an old saying that the gods test those they love most. If that was the case, I sure didn't want to be loved by them. What are you planning, Selene? What more do you have in store for us? Because something told me it wasn't over. When the time comes, we'll handle it, like we always have. For now, we will celebrate our victory and mourn our losses. For every child who had lost a family member tonight, I would make sure their future was funded by myself. I scanned the area, assessing what was left to do. There wasn't much left now. I went over to where a few other pack alphas were, to thank them and to let them know that, like always, I wouldn't forget their help. Once I was done, I turned back to my own family. Let's head home, I said loudly and clearly, before looking up at the sky for a final time. We had done it. The jinn was gone, and our family was safe once again. Join our Facebook and WhatsApp group for more updates, link is given in description. Rest audiobook will be continued in next episode.